So I finally got around to finishing Acceptance by VanderMeer. Yeah, it took me about 2 weeks. It's not a very long book. I don't know, maybe it was because I read it right after Authority, but it was kind of not hard to get through at all. It just, I sort of lost interest in it, maybe. I mean, it was still interesting. The this final book had sort of 3 sections with like a 4th section interspersed into it, taking place over 3 different time periods, or 4 with the 4th one. It's kind of strange. One of them was a 2nd person narrative, which was an interesting choice, and one was 3rd person, and one was also 3rd person, but was kind of 1st person-ish. It was more POV, whereas the other 3rd person one was less point of view and more sort of disconnected. Anyway, so in this one we have, like I said, the 3 sort of time periods that are interspersed throughout the book. The first one is, chronologically speaking, excuse me. The first one, chronologically speaking, is the Lighthouse Keeper. So we go way back to the before Area X was created, and we follow Saul Evans, this lighthouse keeper. Is that what they call him? Lighthouse keeper, keeper of the light. Gloria calls him, and we sort of follow his day to day with his boyfriend Charlie, his Gloria, who becomes the director and the director in the second book, psychologist in the first book, aka Cynthia. She's a kid at this point living in the Forgotten Coast, which becomes Area X. Anyways, so part of it revolves around this mysterious group called the Seance and Science Brigade, or the Science and Seance Brigade, who are like sort of a weird group of people who study sort of paranormal phenomenon, but do so in like a scientific manner with lots of scientific instruments. And Saul doesn't like them, and they kind of butt heads a bit. Anyways, so these people are always coming and going and checking out his lighthouse. And it's through this point of view that we see the creation of Area X. So it starts out, actually before it starts, the Science and Seance Brigade introduce Saul to Jackie Severance, the director control from the second book's mother, who seems to have some sort of, I mean, if she's there before Area X started, and there is some stuff in one of the later point of views that is suggested that Central, I don't know if that's the CIA, the FBI, whoever, the Central Intelligence Agency, paid for or funded the SNSB? Yeah, SNSB. And it was in fact Jack Severance, so Control's grandfather, who started this whole thing. And why they started it, or why they knew something was going to happen in Area X, I don't know. There's a lot of mysteries left unsolved in this. It makes me feel like it gives me Lost vibes, the television show Lost, where it starts out with so many mysteries, and you're like, whoa, like this is really cool. I can't wait to find out the answers. And you either don't find out the answers, or the answers you do get are just bizarre, and you're like, that was it? This did kind of give me Lost vibes, for better or for worse. So the SNSB are studying something. They must know that something's there, because there's something trapped in the lens of the lighthouse, I think, at one point. And so they drill a hole. One of them drills a hole which lets it escape. And then Saul finds it, which is like a small glowing flower, and he goes to pick it. And as he goes to pick it, it like stabs and jabs into him and enters into his body. And that starts everything. So inside of his body, he starts feeling things. Because he was previously a preacher, he starts having these words come to him that are almost sermon-like, which eventually become the words written along the walls of the tower by the crawler Saul Evans that he becomes later. But he starts to feel sick, and then he starts to feel better, and then there's he goes into town, and the people in the town, there's like this horror scene where people are like dying and blood is exploding from them, and they're cavorting and dying and seizing, and I don't know. It's weird. He goes outside and he sees like an apocalypse, like a meteor shower that's going to destroy everything, and then everything's back to normal. And then he sees the Forgotten Coast littered with trash and debris, and then it's back to normal. And then he goes into the lighthouse and he opens up the trap door and he sees all the notebooks there, which the notebooks aren't there yet. So they're sort of time becomes weird. He's sort of existing through multiple periods of time, because he sees all these notebooks, which are from the expeditions, which are from Area X, which come much later than this. And then there's a scene when he's fighting with Henry. Actually, he sees all the books, and also this giant flower of light, like the one he plucked, and he falls into it. He wakes up and he's inside the trapdoor. The flower and the books are gone, but Henry and Suzanne, these two SNSD members, they're dead. He crawls out of the hatch and he sees Henry standing there, but it's like a duplicate of Henry created by Area X, or whatever Area X is, even though Area X doesn't really exist at this point, although time is weird, so I guess it kind of does. And he struggles with Henry. They're fighting on top of the lighthouse, but Saul sees this sort of from outside of himself. It's not him that's experiencing it. He's like sort of disembodied, seeing his body and Henry fight on the top of the lighthouse, and then eventually fall over to their death. And that makes me think that who's actually controlling the body is the director, the psychologist from the first book, because she was fighting someone on top of the lighthouse, and then they fall down and die. So I think that was another weird time thing where it wasn't him that was doing it. It was Gloria Cynthia, psychologist director. Anyway, so they crash to the bottom, and that's when Saul goes back into his body, and he's not dead. Henry's not really dead either, even though he did suffer the fall. He sort of gets up and wanders away and then falls down. And it's at this point that Saul's like can feel this brightness inside him, and he's like, whatever's gonna happen is gonna happen. It's like when you feel like really nauseous and you're like, this is gonna happen. I need to get somewhere where this can like happen in an okay manner. So he holds it in. He goes to where the topographical anomaly / tower / well / tunnel, whatever you call it, eventually comes to being, and he falls to the ground, and that's when it sort of is created. The flower bursts out of him and it creates this tower underground, and he gets transformed into the crawler, who crawls up and down the staircase writing these words, this sermon, where the meaning's not in the words themselves, but in the channeling of the words, in the flow of the words. Yeah, and thus is Area X created. So while we're learning about this, we also get a second POV from, this one's the second person narrative, from the director. Now this is Cynthia / Gloria / the psychologist, the director, and we follow her through joining up with the Southern Reach and creating a fake identity so they don't know she's actually from the Forgotten Coast. She butts heads with Lowry a lot. Lowry's the one survivor from the first expedition who knows her true identity and sort of uses her as his inside person in the Southern Reach while he's in Central. Jackie Severance, Control's mother, pops up now and again as working with Lowry. We see her go through her sort of secret expedition where just her and Whitby go over for a bit and then come back. She goes down into the tunnel and finds Saul Evans / the crawler there and like speaks to him for a bit. She hears Whitby screaming and goes up, and Whitby's like, yeah, there was a duplicate of me, but I killed it. And it's kind of like question like, who's the real Whitby? Is it the one that is currently with her, or is that the duplicate who killed the original? Who knows? And he has with him a backpack that he said the other Whitby had, which contains in it a phone and this plant, which will never is like immortal. And this plant is like identical to the plant of light that Saul Evans had initially started this whole thing. But and anyways, there's this plant that looks like it. No matter what they do, they can't kill it. And this phone, this old phone, which turns out was Lowry's phone from the first expedition, and it's suggested that Area X itself, or its creators, or whatever is behind it, is trying to communicate with Lowry. And Lowry, being members of the first expedition, it had communicated with him previously, or it wanted to communicate with him. But and so it's trying to send his phone back to somehow communicate with him. But of course, he wants nothing to do with it. Anyways, and so we follow the director as she finds out she has cancer, and then sets up the 12th expedition, the final one, and how she's sort of grooming the biologist to be sort of the one that can stop this or whatever. Yeah. And then she goes, it ends with the start of the 12th expedition, which is the start of the first book. So that's the second POV. The third POV is picks up with Ghostbird and Control from the end of the second book, when they had jumped into a portal and entered Area X from a totally different location. And it's at this time period where Area X the border might have expanded, like we saw at the end of the second book, and the border might be encompassing the whole globe now, and so the whole world might be Area X. I'm not quite sure. Anyways, so they are traveling, and instead of going to the lighthouse, or the topographical anomaly, which is what people always tend to go to, Ghostbird wants to go to the island where the biologist would have went. Because she's like, I'm not the biologist, but because she is the duplicate created by Area X of the biologist, but she's like, I'm my own person, but I still want to know, like, the person that I'm modeled off of, what was their whole thing. So they go to the island, and at the other lighthouse at the island, the burned down, busted up one, they come across Grace, the assistant director, and sort of the one who gave Control a lot of trouble in the second book. Turns out she's been there for 3 years. So there is a weird time dilation between Area X and the outside world, and that's why everything in Area X seems dilapidated and rotten and sort of it's not that everything decays at a faster rate, it's just that time flows at a faster rate inside of Area X. So Grace has been there for 3 years, and you think, wow, that's crazy. And then she's like, oh yeah, look at this. And she throws down the last will and testament of the biologist. And we get, that's when we get this sort of fourth section where it's a short wrap up of the biologist's story from the first book, written from her perspective, like a journal entry. And we find out that the biologist had been living on that island for 30 years. Because again, the time dilation thing. So 30 years had occurred, and she managed to live inside Area X. And she talks about how she used pain to keep the transformation at bay. Because remember, Area X wants to transform people, like the psychologist from the 11th expedition who transformed into that bear creature thing. But the biologist managed to use self-inflicted pain and self-harm to keep the transition at bay. And she says, like, when she finally gives in, she's like, it's going to be such a transformation because it's sort of been held back for so long that once it bursts forth, she doesn't know what she'll become. But anyways, over the course of living in Area X for 30 years, she discovers this owl which seems very strange to her, and she eventually starts to think that this owl is perhaps her husband, because remember, the biologist had originally gone to this island to find her husband, a member of the last 11th expedition, and sort of one of the sole survivors of that. And so it's this owl that she spends 30 years with. She thinks it's her husband, but then she thinks it might not be, and it's sort of left up in the air. Um, Anyways, the owl eventually dies and gets torn apart. Like from old age, or breaks a wing or something, and then it gets torn apart by animals, just like animals do. And so she decides, okay, it's been 30 years, like she's probably in her 50s or 60s at this point. So she goes and gives in to the transformation. And that's sort of where her account ends. So we go back to Grace controlling Ghostbird, and then Grace is like, "Oh, by the way, the biologist is on her way right now," and that's when we see this biologist, this new transformed biologist, and she's sort of like she's this massive sea creature, like a whale-like creature, but it's covered in eyes, and they're the eyes of the biologist, and so the eyes of Ghostbird. But she can also like sort of phase through reality. Like she's like, at least I get the impression that she was in a sort of a different dimension, so that she could pass through land and only interact with certain physical reality, and other parts of her could, but maybe that was just my weird reading of it. Anyway, so this weird giant multi-eyed biblically accurate whale thing approaches Ghostbird, and sort of there's a connection between them, because the Ghostbird's like looks like the biologist originally was, because she's the duplicate of the biologist, and they have sort of a weird meeting. I don't know if anything is said, certainly not verbally, and then the biologist whale creature goes back into the ocean to live her life. So then Control is like, well, we got to go to the topographical anomaly now. We got to go down into the well, and he's like, the possibility for change, or to end this, or I forget what he says, but he's like, we got to do it, and they're like, yeah, sure, whatever. So they go to the topographical anomaly. I keep calling it that, the tower. They descend into it. Ghostbird interacts with the crawler, who's like described as a very alien creature. And Grace shoots Ghostbird at one point, but it doesn't really hurt Ghostbird, because she's of course this duplicate. Meanwhile, Control runs past and goes to the very bottom, and we remember that in the first book, the biologist could not get all the way to the bottom. There was some force, not like a physical force, but like some mental force or something holding her back. But Control, even as he's running down, is transforming, because of course he has the brightness, Area X, inside of him, just like everyone else who ever goes to Area X. So this change is overcoming him, but he's really stubborn, and he's like, no, I'm getting to the bottom no matter what. And so he gets to the bottom, and as it does, he fully changes, and it's described. It's not really described what he changes into, but from my understanding, it's a rabbit, like in the second book with lots of the white rabbits. I think he turns into a rabbit, and he jumps the final step into this golden, glowing, brilliant white flower that is identical to the one that Saul Evans had plucked that started the whole thing. And in jumping into that, he has done something, either stopped Area X, or something has changed. And Ghostbird and Grace understand that, okay, something has changed, and so they go to try and leave Area X. They go to the old border, and they notice it's gone. They go a bit further, and they find the southern reach, all decayed and decrepit, and overtaken by it looks like just more of Area X. And so this seems to be what happened at the end of the second book, where Area X expanded so much. And so it sort of ends with them just wandering off, and seeing whether Area X has taken over the whole globe, or has it sort of ended. its expansion, or has something that Control did change something, and it's a lot of it's all left up in the air. I guess the final page is the letter that the psychologist Gloria Cynthia, the director, had written to Saul Evans, and she kept on her in the 12th expedition. And in the first book, the biologist finds the letter and just sort of throws it. But we get a transcript of that letter to Saul Evans, just sort of saying, like, you know, I'll always remember you as the keeper of the light, and that sort of thing. So there's a lot left up in the air, but I do think they do explain what Area X is. As far as I understand, this sort of creature, this thing that was stuck inside the lens of the lighthouse, and then when it was let free, had infected Saul Evans. This thing was an artificially created being, so it is a life form, but it was one that was artificially created. It was artificially created by these aliens, who, of course, come from a different planet. Who knows how far away? If it's a different galaxy or what? Probably not different galaxy, but these aliens were so advanced, or at least so different from humans, that trying to communicate, Area X trying to communicate with humans is like humans trying to communicate with a blade of grass, I think is the metaphor they use. It's nearly impossible, and when they do communicate, it's not intentional, or there's not really any meaning behind it. Anyway, so these aliens existed on this place, and they created this being, this artificial being. To my understanding, is to sort of for environmental cleanup, is my guess. They created this being that would sort of take over a place, a terroir, and clean it of all impurities and like heavy metals and toxic waste and everything, and refresh it and make it new, because that's what it's doing in Area X, right? But there was a great meteor shower or asteroids or something, and they wiped out this alien civilization, and this being was sort of flung into space. Like parts of it were just flung out into space, and like a seed, this one part, maybe because of the lighthouse lens, managed to somehow trap it or capture it, or it landed there. Anyways, and that's when it infected Saul Evans, and you know, it's an artificial being. It's just doing what it's sort of genetically programmed to do, if genetics even exists in these beings, and it creates Area X and just starts purifying it and refreshing it and revitalizing it. So yeah, so that's my take on it, which is kind of a cool story, honestly. Like I said, oh, it's like Lost vibes, but they do give us that, if what I just said is true and I didn't totally make it up. Even if I did make it up, I think it is true because I like it. So yeah, so that was the Southern Reach trilogy, which is soon to become a quadrilogy, because in about 3 weeks, I think, there's a fourth book that's coming out 10 years after the publication or the writing of this series. So that's pretty cool. So I'm curious if that will answer more questions, because I mean, like I said, there was a lot left up in the air. But I do like this author. I do like the way he writes. It's very, I don't know if I'd say the prose is purple, but it's very descriptive and but not overly descriptive like some books. It just uses very unique vocabulary, and sort of leaves a lot up to your imagination. But anyways, that was Acceptance by Jeff VanderMeer.